Good afternoon, everyone. So we can get started. Let me switch to the Mentimeter, and Peter, I will hand over to you for the, maybe it's best to do it with that mouse.
Yes, thank you, Bram. So we have a couple of questions here that we would like to get your input on. First one is we struggle to convince management to invest in better planning capabilities. I see that people are already entering in the Menti. That's good. Second question is we did not follow up on the business case of earlier software investments. We're seeing here also some responses. The third one is our business case is too high level to be able to do appropriate follow-up. I see that one is also being filled in. And then the last one is we did not define a proper baseline to be able to track improvements. I can see that for the 4 questions that people are struggling with these statements. So in general, it's hard to convince management. 3.1, we see there on a scale of 5. Not following up on the business case there, it's a bit flat, I would say. So we see this going in both directions, but we end somewhere in the middle. So people are following up, others less. Same applies for the business case. So sometimes it is a bit too high level. Sometimes it's detailed enough. So I would say that the audience is quite scattered here. That there is a need to become better at these activities, let's say. But some people are already scoring well.
But at the same time, like, nobody says, or not a lot of people really say we strongly disagree. So probably so in different companies, the situation will be a bit different. But I would say it remains a struggle in general, probably on the different fronts.
Yep. Exactly. That's also what we see in experience. And I think that that also shows that the session of today will be relevant. So I suggest that we go to the next question. So this is a more open question. So we're very curious to hear what your biggest hurdle is then when it comes to business case definition and also following up. So feel free to add here what you have encountered in the past as your biggest hurdle. And then we have some input that we can take along in the session and that we can also follow up on and as Solventure improve how we do these type of activities.
Like the first one.
Yeah, that's a very relevant one. Yeah. As an expert, you're sometimes into the details, but it's a kind of a balance that you need to make. Do you go into the details and then risk disconnection of your colleagues? Poor parameter setting, that will come back today. So identifying the KPIs is one thing, but you need to match it to the problem statement that you want to solve. Valorization of the business case, also an interesting one. I believe that also the second part of the webinar will bring clarity there on how our vision is. Alignment on starting base, that will definitely come back when we discuss how we measure the baseline. And then another one, too enthusiastic to start. So we forgot to set the baseline. That's a very common one. But we believe it's important to spend the time there at the beginning, that you establish the right objectives, awareness of management, executive sponsors too far away from the topic. So ensuring buy-in there from the start is also important. I think we see a lot of relevant things here that we also observe in practice. Trust in the data, also key. Okay, I suggest, I don't think that there are a lot of other ideas or hurdles coming in. So I suggest that we get started with the first part of today's webinar. So also from my side, it's great to see so many participants today, always eager to take part in these type of discussions, and happy to also share my experiences. Clearly today people are interested in maximizing returns on their investments. In the next 15 minutes, our ambition is to share with you how you can effectively embed business case definition and value tracking in your planning transformations to ensure success. I think that's key. How can we ensure that these transformations are delivered in a successful way? And we will introduce to you our framework of 7 steps that we apply as Solventure in guiding our customers to do so. And then later in the second part, Bram will introduce the value framework that we recommend using to measure the progress towards the success. Yeah? Now, when we work with our customers, it all starts with the question, what defines success? And before we can answer that, we need to be aware of the problem that we are trying to solve. And important there is that the entire organization is aware of that. So I saw in the Mentimeter's result that sometimes it's difficult to get the buy-in of management. Well, this is the part where we need to get that buy-in. And if we basically bring those problems to the surface, we also need to be able to understand the impact of these problems. Problems are not to be confused with symptoms. That's something that we often say. So symptoms could be like a broken service level or inventory levels going through the roof. These are more consequences of poor processes and systems. And for us, problems are more about gaps in the process, misalignments of the processes with the company strategy. And there we support companies in identifying those specific problems, bringing them to the surface in both qualitative and quantitative ways. Yeah? And also very key there is to establish a common language across the functions, across the silos in the organization, or break the silos, let's say, but also to the executive management. Now, once the problem statement is clear, you should not directly scan for solutions or toolings in the market. Instead, we believe that it's important to design the future way of working in the organization in such a holistic way that it allows you to also assess the change that is required on your people, on your processes, on the data, on the tooling, and on the KPIs. And in addition to that, defining those key KPIs that are important will enable you to monitor progress towards the objectives and the targets that you set. And towards, in the end, solving the problems that we initially discovered. Once that vision is there, it's time to engage the team by exploring solutions and by basically de-risking the future program by scanning for data issues. So once the vision is there, instead of directly looking for solutions or software in the market, but take some time to engage the team to make sure that you are ready to start this journey. And what we there see as typical hurdles are that data is not ready, or that basically the team that will absorb the future change is also not ready to take that or to deliver the project. So there, the engage step is critical. Once we have done that step, then we can do the actual implementation of the future process. Could be tooling implementation, could be process implementation. And by doing that, we establish the future way of working. And then we can ensure that also the adoption once it's live. The adoption is something that is critical. And what is better in terms of adoption, that if you can actively prove the value that you are delivering. So therefore also following up on the initial targets that were set is critical. I have been in these projects for 8 years now at Solventure, and I have seen Solventure evolve from an implementation partner towards more a transformation partner, where we more come from the situation where we support customers in designing and implementing the solutions. But in many cases, we actually saw that, well, the initial problem statement was not clear, that the vision that we want to achieve is not clear, and that teams were not sufficiently engaged, and that we basically started the project with already many risks ahead of us, basically. Yeah. And there I've seen an evolution that as Solventure, we want to be a partner to guide the customer throughout the entire transformation. And I truly believe that is the right approach. Yeah. Now, in the context or in light of today's topic, I would like to highlight the 4 steps in this 7-step process that you see here on the screen, which is the solution design, the roadmap definition, the proof of value, and the value tracking. Yeah. This here is basically these are the key steps in ensuring that Solventure can have impact at its customers. And if I would summarize what we do in these steps, it would be firstly that we define the KPIs in the solution design. We then measure the baseline when we discuss the roadmap. We also define the target of the KPIs that we do based on benchmarks, based on our personal experience. And then thirdly, once we have that common vision, then we also invest time in proving the value. Yeah? So one thing is relying on benchmark data or experiences. Another thing is doing bottom-up analysis to really prove the future value. And therefore, we typically look at a couple of use cases of the future process. We implement that in solutions and software solutions with a subset of data, and then we actually prove the value that we can deliver. Yeah? And that's another basically guarantee or commitment that we take, yeah? That we then also confirm that the business case can be realized. Yeah? After the implementation phase, as I said, then we also continuously measure the progress that we are delivering towards the objectives. That's the theory. Yeah? So that's how we support our customers from a journey standpoint. Now, how does that look like in practice? That's what you currently see on the screen. Let me walk you through it step by step. So we see here at the top a couple of domains in which we can define KPIs. We're now looking at the inventory domain, and here you can see 3 example KPIs that can be defined in the business case and then followed up on later on. Yeah? We see here inventory turns, days of inventory, and then also the amount of stockouts or back orders. Yeah? You can see then for each of these KPIs the baseline, which is basically the state of that KPI during the reference point. In this case, that's somewhere in April. Yeah? We basically take a snapshot of the KPI. In this case, for the inventory turns, that's an inventory turn of 3 times. And we use that then to actively measure how we are progressing. Yeah? Just measuring the progress, then we don't really know where we want to get it. So there also we set the target, as I explained earlier. And in this case, that's an inventory turn of 5 times. And then at the end, you can see then until now, we have already realized an improvement of 0.9 times. Yeah? This makes this very practical. And And this dashboard is available for all teams working on this transformation, and it's also used as status tracking and change tool to make sure that people are really working towards that objective instead of just having the go live as the target. Yeah. So having that common vision, the common view, we believe is a prerequisite of having high achieving teams, both on the customer side as on our side. Yeah. As I said earlier, our mission is to deliver impact at our customers. So therefore, this is a very critical tool and part in our methodology that we can do that. Maybe to end with this first part. What you saw on the previous slide is how we actively do that from a system standpoint. Now that value tracking use case, that's part of our general Solventure Perform suite, where we also have many other use cases. If you want to know more about that, you can contact me or Bram, and we can have a discussion on it.
Yeah, and I think what it shows, Peter, or the evolution that we have made is, yeah, as Solventure, we've been integrating APS tools on top of ERP systems. Yeah? And that's why we had to understand data and guarantee good quality data. Without the data or good quality data, the planning doesn't work. But yeah, once we have our systems connected, planning is not a goal in itself. We only do planning because we believe it can contribute to value. So identifying value, revealing value, and then also tracking the value, it's almost like an obvious next step also for us in leveraging the knowledge we have built up around data. Yeah, I would say the list here is not limited to it. So any project we do, we run into new ERP systems. Could be Odoo, could be a local French system, could be a Russian system. So the data landscape is quite scattered. Yeah? A typical question is also like, should I wait for migrating to a new S4 before I do the APS? My advice is obvious and is often no, because the cost of a new APS is probably only a tenth of the cost of a new ERP, and the impact of a new planning system is typically much more tangible and visible than yeah, the benefits of a new ERP system. So it's certainly not limitative. All right, let's continue. If you still have questions later on, again, don't hesitate to post them. So how do we capture value? And it's so one of the questions here was, yeah, how do I deal with things that are harder to quantify? Yeah, it's obviously a good question, but I would say let's already start with the things we can quantify, because I believe there is a lot we can quantify, and I also believe in general across companies that making a business case for better planning, improved planning should not be that difficult, and I will try to explain why. Yeah? And when we capture value, and it's been described basically in all my books. It has also been described in my last book. In the last book, I also tried to look at non-financial metrics like sustainability metrics. We'll come to that. But the core of what we do is that supply chain triangle. Yeah? And this could become technical. That's why I've listed a couple of definitions here at the bottom. Yeah, but if we want to convince finance, yeah, we will need to talk finance languages. So also in general, when I give supply chain training, yeah, I start with basics in finance, and then people tell to me, yeah, Bram, but this is not a finance training, it's a supply chain training. Yeah, but if you want to be relevant to non-supply chain people, you will need to talk their language. And so the triangle talks about balancing service cost and capital employed. And what is capital employed? it's the working capital plus the fixed assets. What is the working capital? The working capital, three important components are the receivables and the inventory. We need to pre-finance that, and we can subtract the payables. Yeah? And a lot of the work I've done is just seeing that supply chain managers and companies struggles in balancing that triangle. And when preparing an example that came to mind, and it's just one example, that somebody told me, we asked sales to work on margins and improve margins. Yeah, then we saw that the margins were going up, but then they were promising longer payment terms to the customers. Yeah. So we also ran into a receivables issue because the receivables were getting out of control. And it's only one example. I hope you find examples yourself if you read the books. And if I ask it on conferences or in workshops, I probably can list 1,000 examples on how we struggle. And balancing that triangle is not optional. So balancing that triangle is really mandatory. And why is that? Well, if we look at the triangle from an investor's perspective, that's what we typically do next, then we say, well, if I improve service, it should typically help me to get more volume or to get a better price. But in general, we try to improve service, shorter lead times, better reliability, broader product portfolios, you name it. We do all of that basically to drive more sales. But at least in the long run, as an investor, I'm concerned with more than the sales or a sales metric like growth. At least in the long run, I want to see a margin. Well, if I combine the top line or the sales with the cost, I can get to a bottom line metric. You could use EBIT, you could use gross margin, you could use EBITDA. Again, don't reinvent the wheel. Use the margins or the terminology that are common into your company. And if we continue the story, as an investor, it's not only about the margin we generate, but it's also about, what's the capital employed that we need to invest? Because if I have two business units that generate 50 million of EBIT, but one of the business units requires double the capital employed, then that will again make a difference between the two. So in the end, it's all about, what is the EBIT that we generate over the capital employed, over the working capital and the fixed assets? And that in financial terminology is the return on capital employed, which is a return metric. And some people prefer a different approach. They say, okay, we will account for the capital employed in a margin type metric by taking the EBIT and subtracting the capital employed multiplied with the WACC. It's called the economic value add. That is more a profit type of metric. It's potato. As long as you both account for the EBIT and for the capital employed, I think that's what we want to say here. And so if you look at this triangle here, we are combining P&L metrics and balance sheet metrics. And on the one hand, it's obvious, but it's not something which I see companies commonly do. And when we talk about value, we always ask the question like, what's the margins that you will generate, and what's the investment in capital employed that you need for that? It also has a link with strategy. So a lowest price player typically doesn't want complexity. Why? Because complexity drives cost. So they will have a very narrow product portfolio. Again, simple portfolios allow us to drive maximum efficiency in the plant. So a lowest price position defines a certain position in that triangle. If I start differentiating by having more complex products or broader product portfolios, that's going to increase the cost, and that's also going to increase the inventory levels. So costs could go up, capital employed could go up, but that's not an issue if I can compensate with premium pricing. So first of all, balancing the triangle starts on the strategic level. And you can't have the margins of a Harrods or a premium supermarket with the assets and the inventory levels of the hard discounters. That simply doesn't match. And also when we do target setting for companies, we can help you to take into account that strategy and say, if I have a private label business and I have a branded business, what would then be a good margin target or a good inventory target for those two businesses? The targets could be different. And it's not only about financial metrics. Sorry, one step in between. I saw Hans is in the call, and I know, Hans, that you say like EBIT, that's not a real metric, or that's not real value. The only real value is the cash flow in the company. I sympathize with that, because cash flow is an important metric, at least to finance. Well, based on that triangle, you can also start deriving what is cash flow. A popular financial metric is the free cash flow. I hope it's defined here. This is the free cash flow. What is the free cash flow? We look at what they call the net operating profit after tax. That's defined over here. What is it? It's the EBIT, but I subtract the taxes. That's the NOPAT. And then I look at the changes in the capital employed. If my working capital went up, that's consuming cash flow. If my working capital goes down, that's generating cash flow. That's typically what finance wants. And also, if I look at the assets, if I do a net investment in assets, so if my capex is bigger than any sell-off, then again that will be consuming cash. If I'm selling off assets and I gain more money on selling those assets than I do capex, that will again be adding to the free cash flow. And also here, whether you start from a return metric or whether you try to map it to cash flow, in the end, all of these metrics are linked together, and it's also a matter of finding, okay, what is common in our company, but you will need to find these type of connections to make the business case, and also then to prove the value to the company of planning investments later on. So you can take a cash flow perspective, you can take a return perspective, but that's the way to drive financial value. And as sustainable companies, it's not only about financial value, but in the book I also explain that we need to operate that triangle within certain limits, the limits of a social foundation and an environmental ceiling. The example I give there is, if I'm in procurement, it's not only about the quality and the cost, it's also about, are my suppliers behaving in a socially responsible way? And when I'm in logistics, it's also not only about the on-time delivery and about the logistics cost, but it's also about what's the CO2 I'm emitting in my transport process. So an integrated set of metrics, these are the ones we believe you truly need to measure sustainable value. And given that we have access to data, I would say we are compiling those insights. We are compiling metrics, and that's an example here. But you need to understand service level metrics. You need to understand inventory type of metrics. You will need to understand sales related metrics. And you may need to understand what I call causal metrics, like a forecast accuracy. If my forecast accuracy goes down, it will typically have an impact, negative impact on multiple of those financial metrics. So bad forecast accuracy will negatively impact service levels, and as a result may lead to lost sales, and it may lead to lost turnover. And bad forecast accuracy can also lead to the wrong inventories in the wrong place. So it's typically also bad for your inventory position. You can also turn it around. And again, like when we would do an initial assessment, we would look at your forecast accuracy. We would come up with benchmarks in your sector. We would benchmark it with an out-of-the-box statistical forecast. And this will help us to reveal, okay, where is potentially some low-hanging fruit, like, okay, with the current collaborative process, we are not adding value to the stat forecast, we are destroying value, and then maybe we should stop the current process. And what are good levels of forecast accuracy we should get to within our sector and with our level of complexity. When we measure this, we use our own definition. So when I talk about service level and on time in full, people or my consultants will tell me, Bram, but customers are measuring it in a different way. And I said, yeah, this will sound arrogant. It's not meant like that. But I say, I don't really care. Because if we measure it in our way, this is the basis for us to provide benchmarks. And companies also fool themselves. I think Service level is the most manipulated metric in the world, and it most often looks much better than it is in reality. And we want to start from the brutal facts. We don't want to start from any manipulated figures. So next to the value canvas, I think there's some extra perspectives that we can bring to the table. And as Peter said, so we talk about value and how do we drive value in the start, but we then also follow up during implementations that we deliver the value that we anticipated and that we promised to the organization. And how can we do that, or how do we do that? So I and we firmly believe that better planning has a quite direct impact on that supply chain triangle. If you take an APS, that's the main topic here, you're directly impacting service level, you're directly impacting cost, you're directly impacting inventory levels. So you have a direct and very material impact on that triangle. And again, the investment in an APS is only 1/10 of the investment in a new ERP, and the benefits of a new ERP to me are much less obvious. And I think through experience, you know where to look and how to get this started. But in general, making a business case for an APS should be easier than making a business case for a new ERP. And but I think different levels of planning, whether it's FP&A, S&OP level planning, S&OE type of planning, different plans in the end have a different horizon and will be contributing value because they're leading to better decisions in that triangle. But increasingly, we believe that it's not just by implementing a new system that you will drive the value. So increasingly, we link planning transformation to performance transformation. And so defining what are the metrics and how do we find the targets, better understanding where is the low-hanging fruit and how to capture it. Then make a solid business case, I would say, for the real investment and the big maturity step, making clear how we are going to track that value is important. And increasingly, I say also to the teams here, like most companies, ICOM have a complexity problem. And once we understand how we want to drive value, like separating good from complexity from bad complexity, and then either turning that bad complexity into good complexity or reducing the bad complexity can also supercharge the planning performance. So a discussion I increasingly have is like, for your long tail of slow moving items, is it really required to have that as a make to stock? Because if you can turn it into a make to order, you relieve a lot of pressure from the forecasting and the planning process. You also free up a lot of working capital, and most typically you have a lot of inventory sitting in that long tail, but there is not a lot of sales volume or not a lot of margin. And sales doesn't like that, so they will say, but you need to see it's part of this or that customer portfolio. Well, we can do the same analysis on a customer level. What's the inventories we are putting on the ground? What's the volumes and the margins that customers are bringing in? But quite often the service decision or the service design has been decided by sales, but you should never allow sales to decide on make to stock, make to order. And so doing that based on quantitative performance type of insights leads to a different discussion in the end. Data talks and money talks, and it goes a bit broader, I would say, than what a traditional APS implementation would be. So also here, any questions you would have on this piece or on Peter's piece? I think question: can AI play a role in this in the future? I would say obviously yes, Luc. That I mean, we're looking, for instance, at that portfolio management. in general, salespeople don't like complexity reduction. Why? Because if we cut SKUs, it reduces the sales volume, and whether we like it or not, salespeople in general are incentivized on growth and on sales volumes. But I see a big opportunity, for instance, on that specific topic for AI, to give better insights and say, okay, how can we optimize our portfolios? And there is simple old stuff like the recommendation system. If you go on Netflix and you have watched 3 movies, what are movies that other customers with a comparable profile have especially liked? And so improving portfolios by also creating that type of insights to salespeople and to their customers. I think these are promising applications of AI. I would say from a value and a performance perspective. Needless to say that AI will also change the way we do planning. What's the threshold for an APS in the case of small companies? When is it adding value enough to invest for smaller companies? How many SKUs, stock orders, etc.? It's a tricky question. I'll give you an honest answer, and then Peter can correct me. But the honest answer is smaller companies typically have all the same issues as bigger companies. So they basically need the same tools. And if you look at the implementation, they may have even less specialized people or less dedicated profiles. So even the skills gap and the knowledge gap might be bigger than in bigger companies. So the cost could be the same, but the leverage you have is obviously smaller because you have less inventories. The margin improvement percentage-wise could be the same, but in absolute margin will be less. So in that sense, it's not always obvious. But what we can say is like, we have lighter and more boxed planning solutions in portfolio, which are less customizable. So you basically need to more go with an out-of-the-box solution, so that reduces the cost. And like always, there is a Pareto. Like with a limited planning solution, you can probably still get a big share of the benefits. I think that is true, but I think it requires an extra discussion and an extra study. And at the same time, I see smaller companies again investing much more money in ERP systems, where the business case for me is less obvious. But feel free to add to that, Peter.
Well, I would like to add 2 things. So it could also be an enabler for these smaller companies to become more mid-sized or bigger companies. So in a way, it could also be a prerequisite to make that next step. And then it's all about the business case, I would say, and there's only one way to find out, and that's mapping the expected value to the investment. And that's I think an exercise that is specific for every company, and there we are happy to support you, of course, to make that exercise.
Another tricky question, and I think the webinar was foreseen till a 4:45. So if people need to drop off, I already want to thank you. But let's take one more question, and then we will close the webinar. So I would say again a good but tricky question. If the company has already a data warehouse, data lake being used for BI reporting, can that be used as a source of data? So the politically correct answer is yes, but I'm not a big fan of that. And the reason why is that, and it's obviously different company per company, but if I now zoom in on the APS, Planning data is something very specific, and we've worked at many companies with IT partners of the customer, who are technically very skilled in any type of data warehousing or data lakes or messaging systems. But the big problem we run into is that they don't have a good understanding of supply chain master data and supply chain transactional data. So that's why, if I can choose, and I'm the least technical person in the company, but my advice is always that we go for a direct connection to the ERP system, because also when it's about planning, in the end we want to pass back production orders or stock transfer orders. So in any case, the ERP will monitor the execution. So that's where we need to go back to. But I often jokingly say, like, if we need to go through an intermediary or an intermediary system, I tell to our teams, double the timeline and double the budget, because if we don't have a direct control of the data, and there's an extra partner in between, it typically takes more time. And if it takes more time, we also need to spend more effort. So it's a very hard subject. And if I would be a CIO, I would not like a planning consultant to directly connect to my ERP systems. So I understand why where IT is coming from, but the odds are against us. And that's also an experience I believe we need to share. And again, it needs to be looked at situation per situation, but I'm very cautious in relying on existing data lakes. Peter?
Well, and I think the key thing there is that it depends on the use case of that current BI reporting. If it has a very financial angle, well, then you're a bit misusing that lake for other purposes and other use cases, and then you run into issues that people become reluctant to add additional data because it could mess up the original use case. And that's slowing down these type of programs, which is removing the momentum that you can have. And with these type of initiatives, which are rather bigger and have a big impact on change, getting rid of the momentum is one of the worst things that you could do.
And then last question, then we close here from Johan, like how we could be in a situation where we can improve the net margin by 3%, but we would need to reduce the turnover by 1%. What do we then do? Well, I often say any decision is good as long as you understand the impact across the three corners of the triangle. And in the end, it will be a business decision. And it makes me think of retailers like Colruyt, like they are under a huge pressure to keep market share. So if their sales go down or their market share declines, they can get a 20 or 25% hit on the stock market. So from a value perspective, it could be more logical to stop the 1% and increase the profit by 3%. But if you're a stock listed or publicly listed company, and that will give a bad reaction on the stock market, then maybe you should not do it. I think what is important is that you understand that you understand the full impact and what the options are. And then you should basically decide in a cross-functional meeting, like an exec S&OP meeting. These are really the type of discussions you should have in exec S&OP meeting. And that's where you will decide by putting also those type of discussions in the full context of the organization. So thank you for joining. We hope you enjoyed. Keep following us and don't hesitate to reach out to us with any related questions you might have.